The Kodavas, as they call themselves, or coorgs, are known elsewhere in India and abroad, are a small community of about 80,000 in Coorg or Kodagu in the southwest corner of Karnataka state. About 40,000 to 50,000 live outside Coorg. The land they live in is on the leeward slopes of the western Ghats in the evergreen forest areas. The altitude varies from 2,500 feet to 4,500 feet, with some peaks rising to well above 5,000 feet. About 150 years ago, Coorg was a densely forested land with an average annual rainfall of 120 inches to about 200 inches. The valleys were fertile and eminently suited for rice cultivation. The Coorgs and other communities living with them transformed these valleys into terraced fields in which they grew rice paddy. Rice cultivation yields more food grain per hectare than any other cereal. After coffee cultivation was introduced in the 19th century, the Coorgs also took up coffee cultivation extensively. Orange, cardamom, and pepper were indigenous to the land and were of high quality. The origins of the Coorgs are shrouded in mystery. British soldiers, administrators, and scientists had felt that Coorgs were obviously an ancient people. Lieutenant Connor and Mr. B. Lewis Rice are the people who are normally remembered in this connection. Of course, all the peoples of India have come from outside India and evolved here. Some came early and some much later. Anthropologists are convinced that the genesis of the human race was in South Central Africa, in Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe, and spread all over the world. The earliest known reference to the Coorgs or Kodavas in epigraphic records was in the 20th Shasana or administrative proclamation of Hunsur in 1174 AD. As per this, Kodavas of all the Nads fought in the forces of Pemmavirappa, the Chengalva Raja of Palpare in Ponnampete Nad, against the forces of the general Bhattarasa of the Hoysala Raja. Obviously, Bhattarasa had been beaten off, as otherwise the Shasana could not have been issued. The Nad is an administrative subdivision of which there were at least 35 in Kodagu. If the Kodavas of all the Nads could come to the support of Raja Pemmavirappa combinedly and as a distinctive group in his forces in the battle against a common foe, they were obviously an organized society in 1174 AD in possession of land, weapons, and fighting strength. They had their own leaders, whom we know as Nayakas. If they were developed as that in 1174 AD, they must have taken 300 to 400 years to reach that stage of development. So obviously, the Coorgs were resident in Coorg in 800 to 900 AD. The next reference to the Coorgs is in 1398 AD in Mangaraja Nigantu or Mangaraja's Encyclopedia, in which the Coorgs are described as Vyadhas or hunters and as Mlechas or barbarians and foreigners. After 1592 AD, the 12 Nayakas of Coorg agreed to accept the Haleri Lingayat kings, who had originally come from Ikeri in Shimoga, as their own kings, as they could not unite to acknowledge one of themselves to be their head. The history of Kodagu under the Haleri Rajas is in the Rajendra Name, caused to be written by Dodavira Raja in 1805 to 09 or so. Further histories are Memoirs of the Kodagu Survey by Lieutenant Connor, written about 1817 to 20, that written by Colonel Marx Wills and Reverend Dr. Mergling in 1855, and by G. Richter in the Gazetteer of Coorg in 1870. Also, D. N. Krishnaya has written Kodagina Itihasa in 1972, which is the latest comprehensive work on the subject. A remarkable phase of their history, even ferocious resistance, put up by the Coorgs against the forces of Hyder Ali and Tippu during the period 1770 to 1797. Both father and son coveted Coorg for the abundant rice produce, as most of Mysore had much less rainfall. Before the KRS irrigation system was completed in the early 1930s, Mysore had only dryland farming with cultivation of ragi, maize and pulses. Also, the shortest route for the military expeditions to Mangalore and Malabar was via the Perambadi and Peggala passes in South Coorg near Virajpet. Although Hyder and Tippu could establish fortified centers at Madikeri, Dipunad, Bhagamandla and Kushalnagar, they could never really control the countryside, as the Coorgs, as guerrilla fighters, harassed their forces quite effectively. In the process, thousands of Coorgs were killed and whole families had to hide in the dense jungles, but they never surrendered. Even when the young Doddaveera Raja was captured and imprisoned in Piriyapatna fort by Tippu, the Coorgs under their Nayakas continued to fight from 1790 to 1797 or so, when they engineered the escape of Doddaveera Raja and brought him back to Madikeri. When the British attacked Coorg in 1834 AD, the Coorgs fought valiantly against them and only stopped fighting when they found the king Chikkavira Raja fled to Nalknad near Napoklu and continued his usual practice of ill-treating and killing Coorgs. If we reject the mythological stories of their origins, it is necessary to fall back on archaeological and epigraphical records. When such records are few and far between, we have indicators in the domain of physical anthropology, matters of dress, customs, including those of religion, and traditional attitudes of mind. These characteristics could be compared with the characteristics of other peoples presently around them, those of people living in India in the past, and connecting the same with the known history and movements of various peoples over the past 2 or 3 millennia. Where such comparisons show great dissimilarity, it is possible to rule out any affinity or connection with the Coorgs. By eliminating any connections with dissimilarities, people conclusively, and tracing similarities with other peoples, it would be possible to arrive at the approximations to the type of people with whom the Coorgs have the greatest similarities. I have attempted to follow this method and have employed this whole process of reasoning in my book, A Study of the Origins of Coorgs. The 4 important clues are: firstly, head structure as indicated by cephalic index; secondly, dress; thirdly, attitudes of mind and value systems; and fourthly, religion and culture. These features or traits of the Coorgs could be compared with such features and traits of other peoples and similarities identified. Regarding physiognomy, anthropologists consider the cephalic index to be a major clue. Cephalic index is the ratio of breadth of head to length of head multiplied by 100. A ratio of 80 or more indicates the people as broad-headed. A ratio of 75 to 80 is considered indicating round heads. An index less than 75 indicates long-headedness. The Nordic people of Scandinavia, the English, are long-headed, as were the Scythians and the Athenian Greeks. The Tamils and the Chinese are round-headed. According to Edgar Thurston in his comprehensive study, Castes and Tribes of South India, the index of the Kunbis on the west coast is 81.7, of the Billavas or toddy tappers 80.1, of the Bunts 78, the Gollas 77.5, the Kurubas 77.3, the Nayars 74.4, the Tiyas 73. According to Sir Thomas Holland, who conducted a field study of the Coorgs and Yeravas in 1899-1900, the head structure of the Coorgs has a cephalic index of 79.9, which according to him shows a distinct tendency towards broad-headedness. The Prabhus have an index of 79.9. From the Coorgs and Prabhus in the south to the Nagar Brahmins of Rajasthan, along the west coast, there is a long trail of broad-headed people. People of North Iran, Turkey, Mediterranean North African coast, the Balkans, the Alps, and southeast and central France are also broad-headed. Such broad-headed people are not found anywhere else in such large numbers. There are also other indications like nasal index, arm length, stature, hair type, and so on, which prove conclusively that the coorgs belong among the broad-headed people. The trail provides markers to their movement from North Iran. The kupya dress of the coorgs is unique in India, and similar dress can be seen only in the belt of land from the Caucasus to Central Asia and Tibet and Mongolia. The daggers or pichekati worn by the coorgs has similarity in scabbard design to those worn in Oman. The jewellery like koketati is similar to those worn in eastern Mediterranean lands and in Arabia. The wearing of white by coorgs for mourning is similar to the customs of the Zoroastrians. Attitudes of mind of coorgs is akin to those of hill people or mountain people who have dwelt in the highlands for generations. They exhibit greater frankness and willingness to accept people at face value. They are less calculating. They are quick to anger. They regard the plainsmen with good humor but probably faint contempt. They are extremely good in sports like hockey and athletics. The coorgs are basically ancestor worshippers. When they pray, the first words they utter are Guru Karana, their family ancestor. Later, they grew to pray to goddess Kaveri and god Igutappa. Now they pray to all gods of the Hindu pantheon, indicating a gradual Sanskritization of their culture as shown by Dr. M.N. Srinivas in his book Religion and Culture of the Coorgs of South India. Their ancestor worship is akin to the practices of the ancient Greeks who, before drinking wine, poured a small portion from their flagons to the ground as a libation to their ancestors. Considering their traits and comparing to peoples presently in India and those who came in the past, it would seem that coorgs were from somewhere in North Iran or the Caucasus and came along with the armies of Darius and Xerxes in 5th and 4th centuries BC and gradually migrated down south as mercenaries. Such soldiers often traveled with their families, as actual battles lasted not more than 1 or 2 days. Or they may have come with the armies of Alexander in 327 BC. Although some people opine that Coorg came by sea to the Malabar coast and then came inland, that is unlikely, as the Coorgs have no knowledge of the sea or seafaring, and nothing in their folk tales or ballads seem to make any references to the sea. The Coorgs seem to have greatest similarity to the Kurds who live in the mountains, have similar facial features, who are perpetually fighting each other and who have an old tradition of brigandage. However, the matter needs more systematic research, and either government or coorgs themselves could fund a small research team at little expense to trace the origins of this interesting community. Gender relationships among the coorgs were mainly characterized by the protection and security provided to women in an institutionalized manner, both in her father's family or waka and in her husband's waka. During childhood, the girl child is afforded love, security and training to be a wife and mother and to manage a household. When a suitable match is agreed upon through relatives and friends acting as intermediaries, some elders or arwas as they are called from the boy's side go to the girl's home and finalize the match with the father and or brothers of the girl and her family. Arwas in front of the oil lamp where the Guru Karana or girl's family ancestor is worshipped. This is the betrothal ceremony. There is no question of any dowry. The absence of dowry is in itself a great security, as the girl is chosen for herself rather than for any monetary or property inducements. After the formal marriage ceremony and after Dampati or joint muhurtam in the girl's house, before the groom is allowed to lead away his bride, a procedure is gone through called Sambandha Adukva or Sambandha Peraje. Here, in the presence of all guests and relatives, the bride's arva confirms the marriage and obtains an assurance of responsibility from the groom's arva that the bride will be looked after honorably and with respect. He then hands over 12 hard rock pebbles called Ponnachipana to the groom's arva to signify that all future expenses for the bride will be borne by the groom's family. The groom's arva returns one pebble to the bride's arva to signify that all expenses of the girl when she visits the father's house whenever she wished would be borne by her father's family. The girl therefore had living rights both in her husband's house and in her father's house after marriage. When expecting a baby, she had the right to go back to her father's house where she would be looked after with great care until she had her baby and afterwards for a minimum period of 2 months until she got back her full strength. With seniority and experience, the wife would be consulted by her husband and the menfolk of her family on matters of management of the fields, the produce, the livestock, the laborers, and so on. If her husband died, she had full rights to marry again according to the Kodavali or widower remarriage system. However, it was common even 50 or 60 years ago for the husband's younger brother, if unmarried, to marry her after a suitable period of mourning. This was to ensure she remained in her original husband's family along with her children. The system provided great security to the young widow and her children and ensured her honorable status in the family. The jewelry, fine clothes, utensils, and other things she brought with her bridal trousseau remained her property, which she could give to her daughters and daughters-in-law in due course as she wished. A woman had the right to divorce her husband, and if she did so, the matter was formalized by return of the 11 pebbles to her father's okka, and she took back all the jewelry she had brought. She could later marry whomsoever she wished if a person wanted to marry her. If her father's family had no male successors, a daughter could marry a suitable person who renounced his rights over his children by her in the system called Makka Peraje. If in the similar circumstances he stayed in his wife's house to manage her properties, the system was called Vakka Peraje. He had no rights on the property or children who bore the wife's father's family name. These institutional forms of protection and security, which also guaranteed a woman's rights both in her father's and in her husband's okka, existed among the coorgs for centuries. The coorgs were basically agriculturists who cultivated rice paddy in the fertile valleys of the densely forested mountain country. The rainfall was 120 inches to 200 inches per year. Altitudes of from 2,500 feet to over 5,000 feet ensured a cool climate. They also cultivated orange, cardamom, and pepper, which were indigenous to the land. The seasons were such that only one rice crop was possible. While rice was their staple diet, the coorgs were very fond of meat, which they obtained by hunting, trapping, and fishing. To ensure supply of jungle meat and fish, they used to hunt deer and wild boar, dry the meat and preserve it by smoking it on the loft above their fireplaces in the kitchen. They also reared chicken and pigs. All these meats were specially cooked with condiments and natural berry juices and were always eaten with relish, accompanied by liberal helpings of toddy or arrack. The paddy liquor they used to make in copper stills was a favorite brew. Plowing of the fields would start in late May or early June, and be completed by the end of June. Well selected and preserved seed grain would be sown in the specially prepared field, and seedlings would be ready for transplantation by about the end of July. Transplantation of the seedlings into the other fields would be completed by end of August. Thereafter, until the harvesting in late December or early January, the coorg farmer occupied himself with the repair of his house and sheds, tending to his fences, growing vegetables, and weeding out undesirable growth in his paddy fields. There is also now time to go out on hunts, fishing expeditions, and so on, in all of which the coorgs were good. This was also the time for celebrating their festivals. Around 3rd September was the popular festival of Kailpoth. After praying to their ancestors, the coorgs would give themselves up to feasting and drinking, to their village sports of strength and skill. Young and old would join together in harmony. The old would also participate in sports items suited to them, or enthusiastically encourage or tease the young to further efforts and competition. The next great festival was that of Tulasankramana, when, coinciding with the transit of the constellation Libra, water would come surging up from the bowels of the earth into the Kundike or small tank about 2.5 feet by 3 feet in Talekaveri, the source of the Kaveri river. This surging up of water was the Tirtha or holy water. The Brahmin priests continuously dip copper vessels into the Kundike and throw out the Tirtha water into the adjoining bathing tank, where pilgrims from all over South India would plunge in for a few minutes to bathe in the holy waters and purge themselves of their sins. Every coorg home celebrated the festival by placing a bronze plate containing rice, coconuts, betel leaves and nuts, flowers and incense sticks and jewelry on the 3-legged stool about a foot high in front of the oil lamp lit at the Nellaki or praying place. Prayers were offered for the well-being of the family, to the ancestors and to the goddess Kaveri. The third and most important festival was Puttari or New Rice Festival, when the fresh rice crop was ceremonially and symbolically harvested on behalf of the whole family. Before the actual cutting of the stalks, the coorgs doff their turbans, face the east, and shout out to their ancestors, Puli 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 Deva, Puli Deva, Puli Deva, which meant bless us with more and more crops. The festival used to last for 4 or 5 days in the past, but nowadays, with better communication and increased activities, the duration of the festival is reduced to 1.5 to 2 days. In all these festivals, the women of the family or wakka would be very busy together preparing the various dishes for the meals, but would find time to attend the prayers along with the men and to enjoy the various sporting activities. The coorgs celebrated festivals with order and discipline and restrained gaiety. After coffee cultivation was introduced in a big way by the British in 1850 or so, the coorgs also cultivated coffee extensively in their hillsides. Gradually, the economy of coorg has become coffee-centric from being paddy-centric, as in the old days. Accordingly, this cash crop has brought considerable wealth to many coorgs. With wealth, they have acquired education and have been sufficiently enterprising so that today they have distinguished themselves in the defense services, in the professions of medicine, law and engineering, and various other professions. During the latter part of the 20th century, they have also ventured into the business and politics with considerable confidence. Many have become westernized. However, they still remain a deeply religious people, worshipping their ancestors in their Ainmanes or family wakka houses. They are also particular to perform religious ceremonies in their houses. Nowadays, every village with a contact with Kerala has its own Bhagavati temple, where pujas are performed regularly. Since over 200 years, the culture and religion of the Coorgs has borrowed much from contact with Kerala and Dakshina Kannada. Coorg society can be said to have adapted itself well to the era of fast communications and urbanization.